So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Tzayelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end as per Yirmiyahu the prophet. We find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste from many centuries. As we read then Yirmiyahu, we find then the importance of interpreting the instructions the way they were interpreted many years ago, as then Shaliach Shaul, and then you find Shaliach Shimon, you find then Shaliach Yohanan. These people were very acquainted with the holy instructions. And then Leviticus the 23rd chapter, where you find then Shaliach Shaul later explaining of the future shadow prophetic events of the existing feasts. You find then later a projection of the future generations based from the completion of the spring feast. And then Shaliach Shaul, besides the prophets of old, he was the contemporary that knew the linkage with the future based from Leviticus the 23rd chapter. The prophets of old, they knew it. For sure, Yirmiyahu knew it. It's 100% absolutely certainty, because he had the understandings properly set, and then later those layers were confirmed. As this time of the restoration period then goes on, it is imperative for us then to establish a very strong understanding of the trade and what takes place from this time on. Let's then make a retrospective from the time of Daniel. Daniel then you find roughly 500 years before the birth of the Messiah. He was then in Babylon, and he was then given the privilege of understanding the Gentiles' trade of the future. But then he was given the time of his work for the king, mostly Darius the Mede, as then a platform, you might say, of the understanding of the base of the statue, Daniel 2nd chapter. And then the development of amongst the kingdom of the east, north, and south of the restoration period. Then we find it is truly imperative securing areas of mining, so then the future trade then can be established. Let's then make a retrospective also regarding then the 1,000 years without the holy cities. As you can understand, Great Britain was given the privilege of reigning then for 800 years, and the United States for the last couple hundred, and then ended the time of the 1,000 years. But then during this time we find then ourselves lining up with the base of the statue of Daniel the 2nd chapter. Then many people ask, why then Daniel then received a statue regarding then the dream of the king of Babylon? It's very simple. Back then it was custom for people then involving themselves with worship of many kinds of idols, and those were represented by very huge statues, where then they would have some sort of a closet and they would bow down and do many kinds of actions. But then, as this restoration period is giving us very many clues for what's coming then in the future. Firstly, then consider a system via computer. Second, a trade where then the practices of the 1,000 years, from 1009 to 2009, then is replaced. For this understanding, then comes the many facets found then on the scripture, so then we can characterize times and then sections of the understanding of the 20th chapter of Revelation or Galah. There was a facet of then no cities in this earth. There was a time of destruction of the cities of the Messiah while they were active, and then there is a time of precision. So then the world then is guided towards precision trade. These obviously requires a computer. So then what was so easily under the control of scoundrels and politicians with the least of character, then the privilege of manipulation then is replaced with precision of a computer. Second, then, it is very informative. Nations is studying then the instructions, because then they can understand the securing of mining sites. Technology is not the problem. The development of technologies truly is not what is playing. The understanding is securing sites of mining and then resources for then the volume coming in the very near future. We are speaking of from 20 to 30 months, the very most. So then, as far as nations then being more aware of this fact of 20 years left the very most versus then the 20 months, from 20 to 30 months for the starting of the system. These obviously generates instability in many parts of the world. For instance, if you understand those who are involved in imperial type of system or monarchy, as then China becomes more prominent of the trade of the end and leader thereof, then you can understand the imbalance causing in other parts of the world. But these truly, in a natural fact, are consequences of the times and the seasons, or then the transitions taking place. Let's then understand the power of China as the kingdom of the East, and then making deals with Africa, very important, the kingdom of the South, and then the other nations vying for a position, so then China can do their work, and then other nations becoming sites of mining, areas of trade, where then they can realize they can compete with China, but then become an auxiliary force. These obviously causes countries of the world then only to shift from the practices they were so used to, and then doing practices then to help them advancing in the future. Let's then understand the factor of mining. As far as industry is concerned, China has the forward motion. As you can understand, the industry worldwide is going through a big trouble, because an expensive equipment and expensive products are coming very fastly from China, and then the value of their own products obviously then is in trouble. But this truly is normal. So let's evaluate what's going on, for instance, in Australia. It's a very big realm, it's a big island, and then they are going through some industry trouble with car making, equipment making, but they have lots of mineral resources. As they are part of the system of the monarchy of Great Britain, it is truly imperative for themselves and New Zealand of coming up with a system of gathering of ores amongst the nations and the islands of the Pacific, providing then the imperial monarchy with resources for the future. Let's then understand a portion of an article that came out some days ago regarding then the new English robot that can mine under the water. It is absolutely amazing. 1,500 meters a robot can mine under the water, and is going to be used then in Papua New Guinea, northern side of Australia. So you can imagine then those islands already working and doing the best, so then Australia can become then the South Pacific point of trade of minerals. This truly is securing the empire of a new position when the system then becomes available. And once again, it's not truly the technology it's becoming more concerned. It is then the provision of mining, so then they can produce. But not only Papua New Guinea, you find then Solomon Islands and many other places of the South Pacific, where then they have huge amounts of ores and many kinds of minerals that can be obviously sent to Australia. And Australia has lots of coal. And then China has, the present moment, big troubles regarding then the air quality of the country. And then doesn't take much for a person then understand that having the mineral resources already smeltered in a clean way obviously helps China improving their air quality. But truly this is in line with the base of the statue of Daniel, the 2nd chapter. There are those who are then all in waiting around. They do absolutely nothing. They don't even study the holy instructions. But then they make mockery out of it. The time of mocking is over with. Countries that are, for instance, living in such a cave state, and there are many in this world, and the time is very short. When the new system comes, there won't have enough time for securing and then infrastructure. From this time, the next couple of years, it is the crucial time of securing sites, establishing relationships as far as trade is concerned, and then becoming a place where then China can purchase. As the kingdom of the East then marches on, then you find the kingdom of the South adjusting itself, and then the kingdom of the North obviously recuperating what they had in the past. This gives us then a first glimpse of the first transition from the time of the 1,000 years without the holy cities and the transition at this time of the first son, and at the same time simultaneously with the second son, and then securing a place for China. So then later the second transition of the Arab nations, or then the sons of Ishmael, then obviously taken over. But the taking over of it, it's a combination of then the starting forward motion of China, and then as the Arab world then is using the fuel, then it is a sort of lining up where then you don't find the seam. As then during this time nations are then trying to cover this very important factor, it shows you that our nations then that are blind, trying to do on their own, and those nations who are then obviously already linked up with the system of China, such as most of the Pacific. The nations securing a place of purchase from China secures their own future. Not only this, obviously the best prices can go even further. In terms of fuel, there is enough fuel yet in the Middle East for the next 20 years very easily. So as far as this petroleum is concerned, as we can read from the instructions, though it's important pumping oil, yet most important yet is then mining rare materials. Being involved with the rare materials will produce a great deal of wealth in places such as Congo in Africa, areas of South America, sections of the South Pacific can provide a great portion of wealth of the countries. As this new robot then is obviously very reliable as far as we can understand from the project, and the riches of Papua New Guinea, you can imagine what's going to be like when the system then becomes available. The intensity of trade and the fast pace of it. And those who are investing at this time in transportation, mining, they will to reap the rewards in the future. And those nations who are then sit around, they do nothing, they are lazy by nature, they are scoundrels and cheap talkers, trying to lay down cables under the sea rather than do the actual work. Those people won't receive the reward, and they won't have time, because other sections of the world are then already lined up. They constructed, they invested it, and they are doing trade. They are becoming then regular customer. In other countries trying to get then in line won't be as easy as today. There are a few examples. The government of Brazil, for instance, is very much involved with some sort of a control over the Chinese system. They are trying to lay down a cable linking then the northern Brazil with Portugal. 37,000 kilometers of cable, known as the BRICS cable. So then it's already given you the certainty of the system coming very shortly. Not only this, but then July of this year, the nations of the BRICS are coming to this country. There is already a delegation a few months prior of this date, then visiting China and lining up the last details of the visit. Truly the world is changing. And there are those who are investing in infrastructure and transportation, and some nations are only securing their own paychecks, replete with scoundrels. So then, as the time of the restoration period goes on, you read then sections of Revelation. Then again, you never find numbers in the holy instructions, or then verses or chapters. Some of the sections translated of Revelation were translated by people, and they did not understand how to position what they were translating in the context of the layers of the prophets. Then truly each person is left on his or her own. There are those who go line by line, chronological understanding always, and they read portions of it of the past, portions of it of the future, and they make absolutely salad in their minds. And they refuse of making changes because all these holy instructions are holy, can't be tampered with, and then they are ridiculous. The original manuscripts are, but we don't have the original manuscripts of Revelation from the Hebraic lineage. It doesn't exist. Those were destroyed long ago. What you have is a Greco translation of the originals, and then the originals destroyed. What you have then, simply then the prophets and what they spoke of, and then you make a reference of Revelation, but there are no numbers or chapters. Chapter 1:8, for instance, relates with our time. After the system is launched, then chapter 1:8 of Revelation. Sections then of Yeshayahu is linked up with Revelation, sections of Daniel with Revelation. But the most important at the moment, trade-wise speaking, is the securing of places for the future trade. Some nations, they simply don't change. The nation of Brazil, for instance, is then centuries of stealing, cheating. You can't simply change from a system of people simply thieving. They are even exchanging tax credits for publicity of the World Cup. It's how audacious, indiscriminate, and lack of respect for the people of this country, of playing around with their resources, and they trying to patch up with junky sports. It's amazing the brainwashing that this country spends with the media to cover up their own crap. They make idol of people that are dead for more than 10 years ago. And people get brainwashed with some sort of a patriotism of people that are dead. They can't return from the dead and help in the future. And the instructions are so clear as far as the time of the restoration period, and then the trade of the end, and then the starting of the system. Incredibly, some nations, they simply don't learn. And then the system, they must be worldwide, and they try to make a control via then a submarine cable. How stupid. So then, as these instructions are then made very clear, we find then ourselves in Daniel 11:4. This year is very important because next month comes then China visiting then United States in Washington D.C. regarding the agriculture of Africa. And then China many conquests of the trade with Africa, making it the Southern Kingdom. And then you can verify in your own copy of the Zayelic lineage and verify these topics, because the Kingdom of the North is also coming up very strongly. So then the trio nations are then helping themselves and then lining up for later the second transition. Next time we're going to make these even clearer. Comes then the combat of the end. Comes then the coming of Dragon Mart. The first phase is nearly done. It's going to be in Cancun, Mexico. It's already showing then the power of the Chinese system. And then later we will explore more of this topic, and also the retrieving of forces of the second beast. So then comes the preparation for the combat of the end. So please stay tuned, much more coming up.